Start with the most basic question. From 800 BCE to 43 CE, the people living on the island of Britain, what did they call themselves? Nobody knows. Because they left no written records. Every word we use today to describe them, Celtic, tribal, warrior society, all of it came from the outside. From the Greeks, from the Romans, from 18th century European scholars sitting in their studies who needed a mysterious ancient people to fill out their nationalist narratives. The word Keltoi first appeared in ancient Greek texts, referring to some vague direction of barbarians living north of the Mediterranean. It was never used to describe the inhabitants of Britain. Later scholars made the comparison themselves. They drew the equals sign themselves. So when you see a museum label that says Celtic artifact, the artifact is real. The label is made up. We took the word Celtic and used it to bundle together countless communities spread across the entire island of Britain over hundreds of years, speaking different dialects, living completely different lives, and compressed them into a single thing. Then we stuck labels on that thing like mysterious, ancient, close to nature, added harps and mist, and sold it to the modern Scottish nationalist movement, the Irish tourism industry, and a whole lot of New Age music albums. Simon James said it plainly in 1999. What we call Celtic Britain was largely a myth manufactured during 18th century Romanticism, serving the political needs of modern nation-states, not the historical reality of the Iron Age. One thing cannot be confused here. Celtic languages genuinely existed on the island of Britain. The ancient name for the Thames was Thamusas. The Severn was Sabrina. The word Avon appears everywhere, and in Celtic languages it simply means river. The languages were real. But the existence of a language does not mean the existence of a people. A person speaking a Celtic dialect did not necessarily think of themselves as Celtic. The linguist John Koch traced the origins of Celtic languages all the way back to the Bronze Age maritime trade networks along the Atlantic coast, running from the Iberian Peninsula up to the British Isles. In other words, the language spread by sea, by trade, not by some people marching out of Central Europe with an army. A language can travel without a unified ethnic group pushing it from behind. So what was life actually like for people in Iron Age Britain? Archaeologically, they lived in roundhouses. Thousands of roundhouse sites have been excavated and analyzed, and one detail stands out. The entrances almost universally faced southeast. Not for sunlight. It was a spatial ritual. The left side of the interior held production tools and grain storage. The right side was for sleeping. And at the center, a hearth fire that never went out. That fire was not just for warmth. It was the physical anchor of power within the household. Household archaeology calls this spatial arrangement a miniature cosmos. The internal order of each family was a scaled-down replica of the wider social hierarchy. That hierarchy was not maintained through force. It was maintained by which side of the room you stood on every morning, where you sat, who ate first. Daily spatial practice carved the social order into everybody's bodily habits. Looking outward from the roundhouse were linear earthworks stretching for kilometers. LiDAR scanning technology has revealed entire hidden boundary systems beneath vegetation. These deep ditches and high banks were not built to stop invaders. They were built to mark. A society without writing used earth moving as legal documents. Building an earthwork was an oath sworn to your ancestors claiming sovereignty over this land. This logic of writing in earth persisted in Britain for nearly 800 years. At the top of this society were the druids. Earlier descriptions painted them as mystical priests, white robes, mistletoe, moonlit sacrifice, perfect material for a film set. In reality, druids were monopolists of information. In a society entirely dependent on oral transmission, the people who held legal codes, astronomical calendars, genealogies, and medical knowledge were the true power center. The druids compressed that knowledge into intricate poetry and meter, and made apprentices spend 20 years memorizing it. Without written records, knowledge lived inside human bodies, and only inside specific human bodies. The real power of this system was that it operated across tribal lines. Two hostile clans in conflict could be mediated by a druid, because both sides recognized the authority of the same oral legal tradition. No central government, no written law, and society still functioned. This was not mysticism. This was an extraordinarily precise technology of governance. The core asset of that technology was never a temple or a throne. It was a person's memory capacity, and how many tribes trusted them simultaneously. Knowledge is power. Here that was not a metaphor. It was a literal description. Now consider the things thrown into bogs. The Battersea shield, the Waterloo helmet, the gold torques excavated at Snettisham. The craftsmanship on these objects ranks among the finest anywhere in the Iron Age world. And yet their final destination was the water or the earth, never to be retrieved. And in many cases before they went in, they were physically destroyed, deliberately bent, intentionally smashed. Scholars call this ritual destruction. By breaking the form of an object, you remove it from the material world and send it into another circulation. But there is a more grounded explanation. Periodically throwing surplus wealth into a bog was a mechanism for preventing wealth from concentrating too heavily. Elites performed this sacred squandering to obtain religious legitimacy, while simultaneously withdrawing accumulated wealth from circulation, stopping inequality from growing wide enough to split the society apart. This logic requires no theology. It translates perfectly into modern economics. The Snettisham talks, in recent lead isotope analysis, showed that the gold came from multiple sources, some traceable back to continental Gaul. They were not a one-time buried hoard of loot. They were more likely sacred objects used in ritual cycles, periodically offered to the gods and periodically reclaimed. Their existence was a material vehicle for elite status, but the meaning of that vehicle had to be sustained through repeated acts of giving. One more thing. The traditional narrative frames the Iron Age as a male warrior-dominated society where women were occupied with childbearing and weaving. Isotope analysis has dismantled that assumption. Comparing gender and dietary patterns across burial sites across Britain, researchers found that in many core communities, the nutritional status of women was nearly indistinguishable from that of men. At certain ritual centers, the strontium isotope data in female skeletons showed that their geographic range of movement during their lifetimes was broader than the men around them. Broader, not narrower. This means women were active participants in cross-regional information exchange. In specific social contexts, women could inherit land, lead rituals, and take part in legal decisions. This is not a modern projection onto the past. It comes from data extracted from bones. A person's position in this society depended on their place within kinship networks and the reputation their family carried, not simply on gender or physical strength. The word Celtic helps us notice the similarities between these communities, but it simultaneously blinds us to the genuine complexity of how each local community across those 800 years solved the permanent human problems of power, resources, memory, and the sacred. Their solutions were no simpler than anything we call civilization. They just were not written in marble.